the quiet little town of Willow Creek, life moved at a slow pace. The streets were lined with old oak trees and everyone knew each other by name. But on this particular day, the air was heavy with sadness. The Wilson family had gathered to say goodbye to their beloved matriarch, Evelyn. She had been the heart of the family, always full of warmth, laughter, and love. Her passing left an unbearable void for her husband, Charles, and their two children, Ethan and Lily. Ethan, now 25, stood near the casket, his hands trembling as he tried to hold back tears. He couldn't believe she was really gone. Just weeks ago, she was sitting in the kitchen sipping tea and telling stories about her childhood. How could someone so alive suddenly disappear? It didn't make sense. The funeral home had arranged everything, but something felt off. The coffin remained closed throughout the service, which was unusual. When Ethan asked one of the staff members why they weren't opening it, they simply said, "It's better this way." Better for whom? That answer only added to Ethan's unease. He wanted to see her one last time, to say a proper goodbye, but instead all he could do was stare at the polished wood of the casket. Lily, his younger sister, noticed how distant Ethan seemed. She walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. "Hey," she said softly. "I know it's hard, but we have to let her go." Ethan nodded, but inside he wasn't ready. Something about the whole situation gnawed at him. Why wouldn't they open the coffin? Why did everyone seem so eager to rush through the ceremony? As the pastor spoke words of comfort, Ethan found himself zoning out. His mind kept drifting back to memories of his mom. She used to bake pies every Sunday, filling the house with the sweet smell of cinnamon and apples. She'd hum old songs while working in the garden, her hands covered in dirt but her smile brighter than the sun. Those moments felt like they belonged to another lifetime now. After the service ended, people began filing out of the church. Friends and neighbors offered condolences, sharing stories of how much Evelyn meant to them. Ethan appreciated their kindness, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He stayed behind long after everyone else had left, standing alone in front of the closed coffin. Why does this feel so unfinished? He whispered to himself. For a moment, he considered prying it open just to see her face one more time. But fear held him back. What if seeing her made it even harder to move on? Taking a deep breath, he finally turned away and joined his family outside. That night, as Ethan lay in bed staring at the ceiling, sleep refused to come. His thoughts kept circling back to the funeral. There was something about the way the funeral home staff acted, too calm, almost dismissive, that bothered him. And then there was the letter. Earlier that evening, while sorting through some of his mom's belongings, he'd found an envelope tucked inside one of her journals. It was addressed to him. With shaking hands, Ethan opened it and read the note inside. The handwriting was shaky, like she'd written it in a hurry. "If you're reading this," it began, "I may not be gone, but I might need your help finding my way back." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. What did she mean by that? Was it just a random thought she jotted down during her illness, or was it something more? He read the line over and over again, trying to make sense of it. The unease he'd felt earlier returned, stronger this time. He glanced at the clock. It was past midnight, but sleep was impossible now. Instead, he grabbed his laptop and started searching online for anything related to premature burials or medical errors. Every article he clicked on sent chills down his spine. Could something like that have happened to his mom? It sounded far-fetched, but the idea refused to leave his mind. By the time dawn broke, Ethan knew what he had to do. Whether it was grief, curiosity, or sheer determination, he couldn't let things rest. If there was even the smallest chance his mom wasn't truly gone, he owed it to her and to himself to find out the truth. Little did he know, the journey ahead would take him places he never imagined. The next morning, Ethan woke up with a sense of urgency he couldn't ignore. The letter from his mom weighed heavily on his mind. "I may not be gone, but I might need your help finding my way back." Those words replayed in his head like a broken record. What did she mean? Was it just a random thought jotted down during her illness? Or was it something more? He didn't know, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was a clue hidden somewhere in those lines. Determined to get answers, Ethan decided to retrace his mom's final days. He started by visiting the hospital where she had been treated. Walking into the sterile white halls brought back memories he wasn't ready to face. The nurses' station was busy with staff members rushing around, charts in hand. Ethan approached one of them, a kind-looking woman with tired eyes, and asked if she remembered his mom. "Evelyn?" the nurse said after a moment of thought. "Yes, I remember her. She was such a sweet lady, always polite even when she was in pain." Ethan nodded, trying to keep his emotions in check. "Do you know what happened in her last few days? Did her condition worsen suddenly?" The nurse hesitated, glancing at her colleagues before lowering her voice. "To be honest, it was strange. Her vitals stabilized for a while and we thought she might pull through. But then, something changed. We were told she was being transferred to another facility for specialized care. After that, I don't know what happened." "Transferred?" Ethan frowned. No one in the family had mentioned anything about a transfer. "Do you know which facility?" The nurse shook her head. "Sorry, I don't have that information. It all happened so fast. One day she was here and the next she was gone." Her words only deepened Ethan's confusion. If his mom had shown signs of improvement, why would they move her? And why hadn't anyone informed the family? He thanked the nurse and left the hospital, his mind racing with questions. On the drive home, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the funeral home. They were the ones who had handled everything after his mom's supposed death. Maybe they knew something, or maybe they were hiding something. Either way, he needed to talk to them. When he arrived at the funeral home, a wave of unease washed over him. The building looked old and solemn, with heavy curtains blocking out most of the sunlight. Inside, the air smelled faintly of flowers and polish. A man in a dark suit greeted him with a practiced smile. "How can I assist you today?" the man asked. "I'm here about my mom," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. "Evelyn Wilson. I wanted to ask about her arrangements." The man's expression shifted slightly, but he quickly masked it with professionalism. "Of course, let me pull up her file." He typed something into the computer, then turned back to Ethan. "Everything was handled according to your family's wishes. Would you like a copy of the documentation?" "Yes, please," Ethan replied. "And do you have any photos from the viewing, or records showing how she was prepared?" The man's smile faltered for a split second. "I'm afraid we don't provide those kinds of details. Privacy laws, you understand." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Why wouldn't they share basic information? Most funeral homes were transparent about their processes, but this guy seemed almost defensive. "Look," Ethan pressed, "this is important to me. My mom meant everything to our family. I just want to make sure everything was done properly." The man cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Sir, I assure you we followed all protocols. Now, if there's nothing else—" "There is," Ethan interrupted, his tone firmer now. "Why was the coffin sealed shut? That's not normal, is it?" The man's eyes darted toward the door as if looking for an escape. "As I mentioned earlier, sir, these decisions are made based on specific circumstances. I'm sorry, but I can't discuss them further." Frustrated, Ethan left the funeral home with more questions than answers. Their evasiveness only fueled his suspicions. Something wasn't right, and he was determined to find out what. That evening, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with the documents the funeral home had given him. They were generic, a receipt for services rendered, a checklist of items provided, but nothing substantial, no proof that his mom had actually passed away. He stared at the papers, his mind working overtime. His sister walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You've been quiet all day," she said, sliding 1 cup toward him. "What's going on?" Ethan hesitated, unsure how much to tell her. "I went to the hospital and the funeral home today. Things aren't adding up, Lil. Mom's condition improved before she was transferred, but no one told us about it. And the funeral home won't give me straight answers." Lily sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Ethan, you're grieving. It's making you see things that aren't there. Mom is gone, you have to accept that. I'm not saying she isn't, Ethan shot back, though doubt lingered in his own mind. But what if there's more to the story? What if we missed something? Lily didn't respond right away. She sipped her coffee, watching him carefully. Finally, she said, "If you really think something's wrong, then look into it. But don't let your imagination take over, okay?" Ethan nodded, grateful for her support, even if she didn't fully believe him. Deep down, he knew he couldn't drop this until he found the truth. His mom deserved that much. As he sat there staring at the stack of papers, a new resolve settled over him. Whatever it took, he was going to uncover the mystery surrounding her death, or lack thereof. The next morning, Ethan woke up with a plan forming in his mind. He couldn't ignore the pieces that didn't fit: his mom's cryptic letter, the hospital's vague answers, and the funeral home's refusal to share details. Something was off, and he wasn't going to sit around waiting for someone else to figure it out. If there was even the slightest chance his mom wasn't truly gone, he owed it to her to dig deeper. He started by reaching out to other families who had used the same funeral home. It wasn't easy finding them. Most people didn't want to talk about such a painful topic. But after hours of searching online forums and social media, Ethan finally connected with a woman whose story sent chills down his spine. "I lost my dad last year," she told him over the phone, her voice trembling. "They said he passed away in the hospital, but when I went to see him at the funeral home, they wouldn't let me view the body. They claimed it was too damaged. But now, I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if they even brought the right person." Ethan listened intently, his heart pounding. This wasn't an isolated case, it was starting to feel like a pattern. Another family mentioned how their grandmother's death certificate listed the wrong date of passing. Yet another shared suspicions about how quickly the funeral home had handled everything, almost as if they were rushing to cover something up. Each conversation added fuel to Ethan's growing unease. What if this wasn't just incompetence? What if it was something darker? The thought made him sick to his stomach, but he couldn't turn away now. His mom deserved answers, and he was determined to find them. With each new lead, Ethan became more obsessed. He spent late nights poring over medical records, news articles, and anything else he could get his hands on. One article caught his attention: a report about unethical practices in certain funeral homes across the country. Some were accused of cutting corners, while others allegedly mishandled remains or forged documents. Could the same thing be happening here? Ethan decided to visit the cemetery where his mom was buried. Standing in front of her headstone, he felt a mix of sadness and frustration. How could he prove what he suspected without disturbing her final resting place? But as he knelt down and touched the cold stone, he realized he might not have a choice. If the truth lay beneath the ground, then that's where he'd have to go. That night, unable to sleep, Ethan grabbed a flashlight and drove back to the cemetery under the cover of darkness. The air was chilly, and the moon cast long shadows across the graves. His heart raced as he parked his car far enough away not to draw attention. He knew what he was about to do was risky, not just legally but emotionally, but he couldn't let fear stop him. Armed with a shovel he'd borrowed from his neighbor, Ethan approached the grave. His hands trembled as he began digging. Each thrust of the shovel into the earth felt heavier than the last. Sweat dripped down his face despite the cool night air. Thoughts swirled in his mind. What if I'm wrong? What if I disturb her for nothing? But he pushed those doubts aside. He had to know. Hours passed and his muscles screamed in protest, but he kept going. Finally, he hit something solid: the coffin. His breath hitched as he dropped to his knees and wiped away the dirt. Using all his strength, he pried open the lid, bracing himself for what he might find. And then he froze. Inside the coffin lay Evelyn, but she wasn't dead. Her skin was pale, her breathing shallow, but unmistakably alive. Ethan's world tilted on its axis. Tears streamed down his face as he reached out to touch her hand. "Mom," he whispered hoarsely, "can you hear me?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, her eyes fluttered open. She looked disoriented, confused, but alive. Ethan nearly collapsed in relief. He pulled out his phone and dialed emergency services, his voice shaking as he explained the situation. While waiting for help to arrive, he stayed by her side, holding her hand tightly. "Mom, I'm here," he said, his voice breaking. "You're safe now." As paramedics rushed to the scene, Ethan couldn't believe what had just happened. How could this have been allowed to happen? Who would bury someone alive? And why? These questions burned in his mind. But for now, all that mattered was that his mom was alive, and he had found her in time. When they loaded Evelyn into the ambulance, Ethan climbed in beside her, refusing to leave her side. At the hospital, doctors confirmed what he already suspected. She had entered a coma-like state due to complications from her illness. To everyone else, including her doctors, she had appeared brain-dead. Without proper testing, the funeral, home had declared her deceased and prepared her body for burial. But the nightmare wasn't over yet. As Evelyn recovered, fragments of memory began surfacing. She recalled voices arguing above her, the sensation of being moved, and then darkness. Someone had made a grave mistake, or worse, a deliberate decision, to declare her dead. Ethan knew this wasn't the end of the road. There were still too many unanswered questions, too many lives affected by whatever conspiracy was at play. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of peace. His mom was alive, and he had saved her. That was enough for today. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of machines monitoring Evelyn's vitals. Ethan sat by her bedside, his eyes glued to her face as if afraid she might vanish again. She looked so fragile lying there, hooked up to tubes and wires, but to him, she had never seemed more alive. Every breath she took was a miracle he didn't think he'd ever take for granted. Evelyn stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering open. For a moment she looked confused, disoriented, as though she wasn't sure where, or even when, she was. Then her gaze landed on Ethan and recognition dawned in her tired eyes. Her lips parted, forming his name in a hoarse whisper. "Ethan." He leaned closer, gripping her hand tightly. "Mom, it's me, I'm here." His voice cracked with emotion, tears welling up despite his best efforts to stay strong. "You're safe now." Her brow furrowed and she tried to sit up, but her body was too weak. "What happened?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Ethan hesitated. How could he explain something that still felt surreal, even to him? "You were sick," he began slowly. "They thought you passed away. They buried you, Mom, but I couldn't let it go. Something told me to keep looking, and I found you." Evelyn's eyes widened in shock. "Buried?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "But I remember voices, people talking above me. It was dark. So dark." Her voice trailed off, and she closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the memory. Ethan swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "Do you remember anything else? Anything about who did this?" She shook her head faintly. "Just shadows. Voices arguing. And then silence. I thought I was dreaming at first, but..." She opened her eyes again, meeting his gaze. "Ethan, why would anyone do this?" That question haunted him. Why indeed? Was it negligence? A terrible mistake? Or something far more sinister? He didn't have all the answers yet, but he was determined to find out. Over the next few days, Evelyn grew stronger, though her recovery was slow. The doctors marveled at her resilience, calling her survival nothing short of miraculous. But Ethan knew better. It wasn't just luck or fate, it was determination. His mom had fought her way back from the brink, and he had been lucky enough to hear her call for help before it was too late. As Evelyn regained some of her strength, she began sharing more fragments of what she remembered. Bits and pieces of conversations floated back to her, the sound of unfamiliar voices discussing protocols and time constraints. She recalled feeling movement, like she was being transported somewhere. And then, the suffocating darkness inside the coffin. "It felt like I was drowning," she admitted one evening, her voice trembling. I tried to scream, to move, but my body wouldn't respond. All I could do was wait and hope someone would find me. Hearing her describe those moments broke Ethan's heart all over again. He couldn't imagine the terror she must have felt, trapped in that tiny space, unable to cry out for help. But her words also fueled his resolve. Someone had made this happen, whether through carelessness or intent, and they needed to be held accountable. With Evelyn stable enough to talk, Ethan decided it was time to confront the funeral home. Armed with the evidence he'd gathered and his mom's fragmented memories, he returned to their office, this time refusing to leave without answers. When the same man greeted him behind the counter, Ethan cut straight to the point. "I need to know what happened to my mom," he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for evasion. "She wasn't dead when you buried her. How could you make such a huge mistake?" The man's composure faltered, his practiced smile slipping for a moment. "Sir, we followed all procedures," he stammered. "The hospital declared her deceased. We acted based on their report." "Then why wouldn't you let us see her?" Ethan pressed. "Why was the coffin sealed shut, and why won't you answer any of my questions?" The man shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the door as if hoping someone else would step in to handle the situation. "I'm sorry, but I can't discuss specifics. You'll need to take this up with the hospital." Ethan clenched his fists, frustration boiling over. "This isn't just about paperwork or protocols. This is about my mom, a living, breathing person who almost died because of your negligence." Before the man could respond, another employee emerged from the back office. This one looked older with graying hair and a stern expression. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice calm but authoritative. "Ethan Turry." The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Ethan and Evelyn. As the investigation into the funeral home gained momentum, their small town of Willow Creek became a hotbed of whispers and speculation. People who had once dismissed Ethan's claims now looked at him with a mix of admiration and disbelief. How could something so unthinkable happen right under their noses? For Evelyn, the attention was overwhelming. She wasn't used to being at the center of anything, let alone a scandal that had shaken the entire community. Ethan did his best to shield her from the chaos. He turned off the news when reporters started camping outside their house, and he politely declined interview requests on her behalf. But no matter how hard he tried, there was no escaping the reality of what she'd been through, or the lingering questions about why it had happened in the first place. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Evelyn broke the silence. "Do you think I'll ever feel normal again?" she asked softly, staring out the window at the fading sunlight. Ethan set down the cup of tea he'd been holding and turned to face her. "You will," he said firmly, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. "It's going to take time, but we'll get through this together." She gave him a small, grateful smile, though her eyes still carried a shadow of doubt. "I keep thinking about all those other families," she admitted. "What if someone else is out there, buried alive like I was? What if they don't have someone looking for them?" Her words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He hadn't allowed himself to dwell on that possibility. It was too painful to consider. But deep down, he knew she was right. If the funeral home had made such a catastrophic mistake with Evelyn, who's to say it hadn't happened before? Or worse, what if it happened again? Determined to uncover the truth, Ethan dove deeper into the investigation. Local authorities had launched an official inquiry, but progress was slow. Frustrated by the lack of urgency, Ethan decided to take matters into his own hands. He reached out to a journalist friend of his, an old classmate from high school named Chris, who specialized in investigative reporting. Chris agreed to meet him at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. "I don't know how much help I can be," Chris warned as they settled into a booth. "But I'll look into it. This sounds like a story that needs telling." Ethan nodded gratefully. "That's all I'm asking, just shine a light on this. Make sure people know what happened so it doesn't happen again." Over the next few weeks, Chris dug into the funeral home's operations, uncovering disturbing connections between the business and a pharmaceutical company based in the city. According to leaked documents, The company had been conducting secret trials on terminally ill patients, testing drugs designed to induce catatonic states as a cheaper alternative to euthanasia. The goal apparently was to create a product that could mimic death without actually killing the patient, though the risks were enormous. Evelyn, it seemed, had unknowingly become part of these experiments. Whether it was intentional or accidental remained unclear, but one thing was certain. The funeral home had failed to properly verify her condition before declaring her dead. Instead of questioning the hospital's diagnosis, they had rushed through the process, sealing her fate and nearly hers forever. When Ethan shared this information with Evelyn, she listened quietly, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she simply said, "We have to stop them." He nodded, determination burning in his chest. "We will." With Chris's article exposing the scandal, public outrage spread like wildfire. Protesters gathered outside the funeral home, demanding accountability. Families who had lost loved ones came forward, sharing their own stories of negligence and heartbreak. The pressure mounted until authorities had no choice but to shut down the facility and arrest several key figures involved. For Evelyn, the turning point came during a meeting with investigators. They asked her to recount her experience in detail, hoping to use her testimony to build a stronger case against the perpetrators. Sitting in the sterile conference room, surrounded by strangers, Evelyn found herself reliving every harrowing moment, the voices above her, the suffocating darkness, the desperate hope that someone would find her. "It felt like I was trapped in a nightmare," she told them, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "But I never stopped believing that my family would come for me. And they did." Her words resonated deeply, not just with the investigators, but with everyone who heard her story. It was a reminder of resilience, of love, and of the unbreakable bond between a mother and her son. As the dust began to settle, Ethan and Evelyn focused on rebuilding their lives. The ordeal had changed them both in ways they were still trying to understand. Evelyn struggled with anxiety, especially at night, when memories of the coffin threatened to overwhelm her. But Ethan was always there, sitting beside her, holding her hand until the fear passed. One day, while flipping through an old photo album, Evelyn paused at a picture of herself baking pies in the kitchen. Her smile was radiant, her eyes full of life. She ran her fingers over the image, then looked up at Ethan. "I want to bake again," she said suddenly. Surprised, Ethan grinned. "Really? You haven't baked since—" "I know," she interrupted, her voice firm. "But I need to start living again, not just surviving. Baking makes me happy. It always has. Maybe it'll help me feel like myself again." So they spent the afternoon in the kitchen, filling the house with the comforting aroma of cinnamon and apples. As Evelyn worked, her movements slow but deliberate, Ethan watched her with a mixture of pride and relief. This was his mom, the woman who had raised him, loved him, and taught him the value of perseverance. By the time the pie came out of the oven, golden and steaming, Evelyn looked more at peace than she had in months. She sliced a piece for Ethan and handed it to him with a smile. "Here," she said, "for saving me." He took the plate, his throat tightening with emotion. "No, Mom, thank you for coming back." And as they sat together, eating pie and laughing like old times, Ethan realized something important. Life doesn't always give second chances, but when it does, you hold on tight. Because sometimes miracles really do happen, and this one had brought them closer than ever. The days that followed were a blur of activity for Ethan and Evelyn. The scandal surrounding the funeral home had ignited a firestorm in Willow Creek, and the town was buzzing with anger, grief, and disbelief. People who had once dismissed Ethan's suspicions now rallied behind him, sharing their own stories of loss and frustration. It was clear that this wasn't just about one family. It was about a system that had failed too many. Evelyn, though still recovering physically and emotionally, found herself at the center of it all. She didn't ask for the attention, but she couldn't ignore the weight of what had happened to her. Every time she heard another family talk about losing a loved one under suspicious circumstances, she felt a pang of guilt. "What if I'm the only one who got a second chance?" she whispered to Ethan one night. How can I live knowing others might not have been so lucky? Ethan squeezed her hand, his voice firm but gentle. You're not responsible for what happened to them, Mom. But you are the reason people are finally paying attention. Because of you, we're uncovering the truth. She nodded slowly, but he could see the worry lingering in her eyes. He knew she carried the burden of survival, a mix of gratitude and sorrow that came with being the exception rather than the rule. To help her cope, he encouraged her to focus on small victories, baking pies again, taking short walks around the neighborhood, reconnecting with old friends who brought laughter back into her life. Each step forward was a reminder that she was more than a victim. She was a survivor. Meanwhile, Ethan threw himself into advocating for change. With Chris's investigative article gaining national attention, authorities launched a broader inquiry into unethical practices within the funeral industry. Investigators uncovered a web of corruption involving not just the local funeral home, but several others across the state. The pharmaceutical company tied to the experimental drugs was also implicated, its executives arrested on charges of fraud and endangerment. For Evelyn, the hardest part was testifying against those responsible. Sitting in front of a packed courtroom, surrounded by reporters and curious onlookers, she felt exposed and vulnerable. Her hands trembled as she recounted the details of her ordeal, the voices above her, the suffocating darkness, the moments when she thought she might never see her family again. But as she spoke, something shifted inside her. This wasn't just about reliving her pain. It was about ensuring no one else would suffer the same fate. When she finished, the room fell silent. Even the judge seemed moved, pausing before thanking her for her courage. As she stepped down from the stand, Ethan met her halfway, wrapping her in a tight hug. You did amazing, he murmured. Proud doesn't even begin to cover it. But the fight wasn't over yet. Beyond holding individuals accountable, Ethan pushed for systemic reforms. He worked with local lawmakers to draft stricter regulations for funeral homes and hospitals, including mandatory testing protocols to confirm death and increase transparency in handling remains. His efforts inspired others to join the cause, forming a coalition of families determined to prevent future tragedies. As the weeks turned into months, the Wilsons began to rebuild their lives. Evelyn Ritu. Months had passed since the scandal broke, and Willow Creek was slowly beginning to heal. The town had been through so much: anger, grief, betrayal. But out of the darkness came a renewed sense of purpose. People were talking more openly about death, accountability, and the importance of questioning systems they'd once trusted blindly. For Evelyn and her family, life had settled into a fragile but hopeful rhythm. Evelyn spent her days rediscovering pieces of herself she thought she'd lost forever. She returned to volunteering at the community center, teaching art classes to kids who reminded her of her own children when they were young. Their laughter filled the room like sunlight streaming through cracks in a storm cloud, warming her heart in ways she hadn't expected. One little girl, barely 6 years old, even called her Grandma Evie, which made her tear up the first time she heard it. It wasn't just a nickname. It was a reminder that life moved forward even after tragedy. At home, things were different too. Ethan and Lily had grown closer than ever, united by the shared trauma of nearly losing their mom. They argued less, laughed more, and found comfort in simply being present for each other. Dinner conversations weren't always easy. Sometimes, Evelyn would bring up memories of her time in the coffin, describing how it felt to wake up in total darkness or hear distant voices arguing above her. But instead of shying away from those moments, her kids listened intently, offering support without judgment. They knew she needed to process everything in her own way, and they were determined to help however they could. One evening, as the three of them sat on the porch watching the sunset, Evelyn turned to Ethan with a thoughtful expression. You know, she said, I've been thinking, maybe I should start speaking publicly about what happened. Ethan raised an eyebrow, surprised. Are you sure? That's a big step. She nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. I've spent months feeling angry, scared, guilty, all because of what they did to me. But now, I feel like sharing my story might help others. If even one person hears it and decides to ask questions or fight back against something unfair, it'll be worth it. Lily chimed in, her voice soft but firm. Mom, you don't have to do this alone. We'll be right there with you every step of the way. Evelyn smiled, touched by their unwavering support. I know, and that's why I think I can actually do it. The next few weeks flew by in a flurry of preparation. With Ethan's help, Evelyn began drafting speeches and reaching out to local organizations eager to amplify her message. Her first talk was at a small gathering hosted by the hospital where she'd been treated. Standing behind the podium, clutching index cards scribbled with notes, she took a deep breath and looked out at the crowd. I never imagined I'd be standing here today, she began, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside her. Not long ago I lay in a coffin, convinced no one would find me in time. I thought my story ended there, but it didn't. Thanks to my son, who refused to give up, I'm here today. Alive. Grateful. Determined. As she spoke, her words resonated deeply with everyone in the room. Some wiped away tears, others leaned forward, hanging on her every sentence. By the end of her speech, the applause was thunderous, not just for Evelyn, but for the courage it took to confront such a painful chapter head-on. Word of her talks spread quickly, and soon invitations poured in from neighboring towns, schools, and advocacy groups. Each time she stepped onto a stage, Evelyn grew more confident, her message clearer. Question everything. Demand transparency. Fight for justice. She became a voice not just for herself, but for all those who couldn't speak, including the families still searching for answers about their loved ones. For Ethan, seeing his mom transform into such a powerful advocate filled him with pride. He continued working alongside her, helping organize events and connecting with other survivors. Together they pushed for systemic changes, lobbying lawmakers to pass stricter regulations for funeral homes and hospitals. Their efforts paid off when new legislation was introduced, requiring mandatory second opinions before declaring a patient deceased and mandating regular inspections of funeral facilities. But amidst all the progress, there were still quiet moments of reflection. Late one night, as Evelyn sat alone in the living room flipping through an old photo album, Ethan walked in and joined her on the couch. "What are you looking at?" he asked gently. She pointed to a picture of herself baking pies in the kitchen, her face glowing with happiness. "Just remembering how much I used to love doing this," she said with a wistful smile. "It's funny. I thought I'd never bake again after everything that happened, but now it feels like a part of me coming back." Ethan grinned. "Maybe we should bake together sometime. You can teach me your secret recipe." Her eyes lit up at the idea. Deal. The following weekend, they spent hours in the kitchen, flour dusting their clothes and countertops as they worked side by side. Laughter echoed through the house, mingling with the sweet smell of cinnamon and apples. For Evelyn, it was more than just baking. It was reclaiming a piece of her identity, proving to herself that she was still capable of creating joy. As they pulled the pie out of the oven, golden and steaming, Evelyn cut 2 slices and handed one to Ethan. "Here," she said with a warm smile, "for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." He accepted the plate, his throat tightening with emotion. "No, Mom, thank you for coming back to us." They sat together at the table, savoring the pie and the quiet companionship. In that moment, nothing else mattered. The past, the future, the scars they carried. All that mattered was the here and now, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her son. Later that night, as Evelyn tucked herself into bed, she reflected on how far they'd come. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but she knew they'd face it together, as a family. And sometimes that was all anyone really needed to keep moving forward. The Wilson family stood together under a cloudy sky, surrounded by rows of chairs filled with familiar faces. It was the day of the memorial service, a gathering to honor those who had been lost to negligence and misconduct within the funeral industry. The event wasn't just about mourning. It was a celebration of resilience, justice, and the courage to demand change. For Evelyn, this moment carried a weight she couldn't fully put into words. She had come so close to being one of the names etched on the makeshift memorial wall behind the podium. Ethan glanced at his mom as they waited for the ceremony to begin. Her hands trembled slightly, but her expression was calm, resolute. Over the past few months, he'd watched her transform from someone haunted by fear into a beacon of hope for others. Today, she would stand in front of everyone, not just as a survivor, but as a voice for those who could no longer speak for themselves. When it was time, Evelyn stepped up to the microphone, her presence commanding attention without saying a word. The crowd fell silent, every eye fixed on her. She took a deep breath, her gaze sweeping over the sea of faces before settling on Ethan and Lily sitting in the front row. Their smiles gave her strength. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "I never thought I'd be here today, at least not like this." A soft chuckle rippled through the audience, easing some of the tension. "A year ago, my family said goodbye to me, or so they thought. I woke up in a coffin, buried alive, because mistakes were made, mistakes that should never happen to anyone." Her words hung heavy in the air, raw and honest. She paused, letting them sink in before continuing. "But I'm not here to dwell on what went wrong. I'm here to talk about what comes next, about how we turn pain into purpose, how we fight for transparency, accountability, and justice, not just for ourselves, but for future generations." As she spoke, tears welled up in the eyes of many listeners. Some nodded in agreement, while others clutched tissues tightly. Evelyn's voice wavered only once when she mentioned the families who hadn't been as fortunate as hers. "There are empty chairs at tables across this town," she said softly. "Chairs that will never be filled again. We owe it to them to keep asking questions, to keep pushing for answers, even when it feels impossible." By the end of her speech, the applause was thunderous. People rose to their feet, cheering not just for Evelyn but for the movement she represented. Families embraced one another, finding solace in shared grief and determination. For the first time in a long while, the atmosphere felt less like mourning and more like unity, a collective vow to protect each other from harm. After the ceremony, the Wilsons mingled with attendees, sharing stories and exchanging hugs. One woman approached Evelyn, clutching a photo of a young man in a baseball cap. "This is my son," she said, her voice breaking. "They told us he passed away after an accident, but something never felt right. Your story gives me hope that maybe I can find out the truth." Evelyn placed a hand on the woman's shoulder, her own eyes glistening. "You deserve answers," she said firmly. "And if there's anything I've learned, it's that you don't have to face this alone. Ask questions, demand proof, and don't stop until you're satisfied." That interaction stayed with Evelyn long after the crowd dispersed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues across the cemetery, she walked over to the tree they'd planted near her original gravesite. Its leaves rustled gently in the breeze, a reminder of life emerging from darkness. Ethan joined.
He